Hey, it's Michael, and I've got a question for you. If you lost your ability to speak or your primary means of communication, what would you prioritize differently in your life? Welcome to the follow-up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. Come with me on a journey as I explore what it means to find common ground at a time when it feels increasingly harder to do so. To listen more than we speak so that we can understand that our differences don't have to divide us. My aim with this show is to bring you perspectives and ways of looking at issues or topics that perhaps you haven't considered before. To teach you how to ask more, better questions so that we might become more reachable as people. I'm a former journalist who believes everyone has a story to tell, and it's only when we ask questions and listen that we reveal what connects us as humans. Our dreams, our desires, our experiences, our ideas, and what we stand for rather than what we are against. We have such easy access to make our thoughts known these days. Like, even the fact that I have this podcast is a remarkable display of this fact. That a pretty regular guy like me can create an entire show about topics so important like good communication and finding common ground on polarizing issues. And that people all over the world listen to it. For most of us, and certainly those of you listening to this podcast right now, we hold the ability to communicate instantly with the world about any topic of our choosing. But I'll tell you, a big concern of mine is that I feel too many of us have forgotten the immense power of our words. Words have the ability to crush or to uplift, to maim or to heal, to destroy or to propel forward. Mike Tyson, yes, that Mike Tyson, the ear-biting championship boxer, once said, "Social media made y'all way too comfortable with disrespecting people and not getting punched in the face for it." All right, now that's certainly more harsh than I would phrase it, but I'm also not a boxer. In my first TEDx talk, I attempted my own take on this when I offered up and I mentioned that social media is driving a wedge between how we communicate and the reality that we exist within, being that we can sling our arrows of hate, anger, rage, persecution, judgment. We can fire these off at someone and never actually have to deal with the ramifications of where those arrows land. With the people who absorb our words. But what if it were all taken away? What if you lost your voice? What if you lost the ability to communicate with the world in the ways that you love? How would your life change? In what ways would your priorities shift? That's the story this week's guest brings to the show. In 2015, Greg Offner lost his voice, literally. As a singer, Greg was stripped of the communication outlet that brought him the most joy, and he endured more than a dozen surgeries to bring his voice back. And he had to spend 2 months in total silence to let his vocal cords heal. As you might have already figured out, since I've asked Greg to be a guest here on the podcast, a medium that kinda sorta relies on vocal communication, Greg regained the ability to speak. And now he's sharing what the experience revealed to him. How he dealt with the loss, how he recovered in more ways than just vocally, and why he's trying to get others to embrace disruption for the good it can bring.
I gotta know how you got into dueling pianos. I gotta know the story here, the background. Like, how does one get into that line of work, man? I know it's not the thing you do full time, but how does one get into that?
It's an accident, I think, is how a lot of people who do what they love say they got into it. I was working a sales job during the day. I had just gotten out of college and had studied music in school. So it was no surprise to my friends and loved ones that I loved music and loved to perform. But I got a call from one of my college housemates who said that she was going downtown, going down to Philadelphia into Center City, and her friend's father had opened a piano bar, and did I want to go? Yeah, I'd love to. So we all hopped in the car, went down. It was my first ever, I think, time at a piano bar. The only performing I had done outside of, orchestras and choirs and things like that was at the occasional karaoke night. And so I think from Jump Street, I was smitten with the idea of, this is really cool. Somebody sits there and is kind of the star of the show at this piano bar and takes requests. And the father asked when he heard that I was a musician if I wanted to get up and play. And I had a couple of drinks at that point. So I said, sure, what's the worst that could happen? And I got up, played 3-ish songs. And when I was done, he walked over to me and he said, so do you want to do Wednesday nights, like as your gig? And I should say, as I'm telling this story, I realized that that's not actually the first time I was at a piano bar. The first time was when I visited Las Vegas. I was dating a girl briefly while I was in college. I think I had just turned 21. And she was doing a show here in Philadelphia, but she lived in Vegas. And so when the show closed, we were sort of, chatting and whatnot. She had invited me out to Vegas. And I went to the bar on Times Square at the New York Casino. That was the first time I ever saw dueling pianos. And I was like, oh my God, what is this? This is amazing. Someone paid for me. I don't know how this conversation happened actually at the casino bar, but someone found out that I could sing and paid the piano players to let me get up and perform. I was not ready to perform publicly, and I fell all over the keyboard. That's sort of what musicians say when they're not hitting the right notes. I fell all over the keyboard. It sounded like crap. They stopped me and said, we'll play, you sing. And people loved it because I was certainly able to sing it. It was just singing and playing at the time was difficult. So fast forward a couple years, we get to the story I just shared about my friend's father's bar. And after playing there for 3 or 4 years, a dueling piano bar opened up, and some of the performers that had been at this bar, so a single piano bar, went over to this new bar, the dueling piano bar, and there had never been one in Philadelphia before. In fact, they weren't really popular, to my knowledge, around the country. It was really like Las Vegas and maybe a couple big cities. So I got into dueling, which is a wholly different show. I mean, it's a totally different experience. Solo piano bar is exactly that loungy style. You're kind of doing what you want, one-man show type of thing. Dueling pianos is much more practiced, orchestrated chaos. Because when we're working together, we make things seem like they're happening spontaneously, but really these are well-rehearsed and crafted bits that just tend to happen over and over again. So we've got a handful of bits and gags and skits in our pocket, and depending on the night and depending on the crowd, we sort of, there's some really irreverent and like X-rated ones that we can pull out for the right crowd, and there's some really like G-rated Disney mashup funny ones that we'll pull out for the right crowd. There's ones that are great for a crowd when there's a college game in town, like the Army-Navy game in Philadelphia. There's a whole bag of material that we only pull out at that time because it's Army versus Navy, so very specific stuff. But I got into it by accident and found that it is a very small group of people that do this. You think, oh, there's dueling piano bars around the world. There aren't as many as it seems like. And there are even fewer, I guess there aren't even fewer. There's a handful of performers in each city that really kind of do it. And so once you learn the routine, I guess it's in a way like being a professional musician. You're sort of indoctrinated into this weird group, and we're all kind of nuts in some way, that has a very peculiar skill set that's only really applicable in a very narrow lane.
What's your earliest memory of music? How far back does this go?
Oh, when I was a kid. So it's hard to say what my earliest memory is because we look at pictures, I think, and then we create memory from that book. Oh, I kind of remember that outfit I was wearing, and I guess it happened here. So memory is a really funny thing that interests me. But my earliest memory of music is a family friend of ours named Ken McBride, and he still performs, but no idea how my family knows him, except he was a performer in a Jersey Shore town called Sea Isle City that we went to growing up. There's a bar there called Bush's. It's no longer in existence, but Ken was the performer there. I mean, he was the guy, and he would pack the house, and he had a whole routine that he would do, and he had this one routine in particular that I think was what he became known for, which is the Phantom of the Opera routine. And he had the mask and the cape, and he would do the songs, and his has a beautiful, beautiful baritone voice. I mean, just a barittenor, really beautiful voice. And we became friends with him. And so I remember visiting him in wherever they lived in New Jersey. And he had this beautiful white baby grand piano, and sitting on his lap, and he was kind of showing me how to, press the keys. And it was clear that I was gravitated towards music when I was younger. And I don't know that my parents really knew what to do about that, because my dad was sort of a recreational musician and had performed here and there, but never really took it seriously. I think his father came from that generation that said, get a job, work there 30 years, get your pension, like don't mess around with music. That doesn't pay. You're a beatnik musician. So my parents didn't know what to do with me, but my mom shared a story that at one point I was 2 or 3 years old and had one of those little xylophones and was plinking out a pretty discernible melody on the xylophone. And my Nana said to my mom, you got to put this kid in a conservatory. Like that, he can do that right now. Is like that's something unique. And I think they said, well, yeah, maybe not conservatory, but we'll get him in piano lessons. And that's kind of where it started.
So then you get to the point where you are first at this piano bar performing Wednesday nights. You move to the dueling piano bar. Just as somebody who's only been in a dueling piano, we had at a previous job that I was at for a holiday party, we had a dueling piano team come in. For somebody who that's my only experience of this.
Okay.
What you said it was like a staged chaos, or this staged coordination of chaos. How do you get to that point? Like, how do you find first a partner to do that, and then get to that point where you are feeling in flow and rhythm with that person?
Well, so to the first part, how do you find a partner? It's very much like joining an improv troupe. You get a couple gigs if you're decent. You get one gig if you suck. But you get an at bat, and they see what the chemistry is like between the performers. Now, I sort of had an inside track because I knew some of these performers, and so they knew that I wasn't a jerk. But it's interesting that everybody in a dueling piano performance brings something kind of unique to the table. Like there are some performers who are phenomenal keyboardists. They are amazing. They're musically and technically gifted, and their voice is okay. They are not going to mint any records that would sell with that voice, but boy, what they can do on the piano is really impressive. There are other folks who are really not that good at the piano. Amazing voice. And then there are folks who are sort of mediocre at both, but they're just so good at getting the crowd involved and being the crazy person and doing the jokes and the this and the that all of those, I think, to put a really great dueling act together, they sort of need to be there. And the earth-shattering ones, the folks who really make it big and I would say have residencies in Vegas, which is probably like the mecca of dueling piano players, they've kind of got it all, right? Or most of it all. And so I fell into the category, I think, of really, really good voice, so piano skills, but I also wasn't afraid to get up and make an ass of myself, do funny stuff, stand on top of the piano, go out into the crowd, get people up and dancing. So, like Meatloaf said, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I think that's really how I got into it. What was the second part of the question? How do you get into the flow?
Yeah, how do you get into that flow with your partner? Yeah. Shouldn't have asked 2 questions in one.
No, they do sync up, I think, yeah, because there are some of the performers I'd work with that we can fake the chemistry on stage. It's kind of good enough. But I don't know that we'd try to recreate it intentionally. And now that I'm doing something different with my life, but still involve music, the folks who I really had the chemistry with, I actually bring them in to what I'm doing now. And I've been able to work with them. And the folks that don't are lovely people. And if I see them out, high fives and hugs and everything, it's just, we didn't have that connection. So I don't know that I know where it comes from, but I know that some of the elements are, we perform to make each other better. People always ask who wins the duel, like, well, who won? When you were a dueling piano player, like, did you win a lot of the duels? It's actually not between the piano players. It's really between the audience. It's who gets the requests that they want played more, played first. That's really the duel. Our job as the piano players is to give the audience an experience that satisfies, that hopefully overachieve is the wrong word, over delivers on what they were expecting. And to do that, you've got to trust that even if you make a misstep, you start in the wrong key, you forget a lyric, that the other person is going to throw you a lifeboat, that they're going to be there to step in. And that I think comes from repetition, from spending more time doing it more often, which is why practicing, rehearsing is so important in really, really good dueling shows. I think the ones that are great are the ones who have rehearsed, not who just show up on Friday night 5 minutes before the set's supposed to start and go, okay, I'm here. Turn on the microphone. And I know, because I was that guy for the beginning part of my career. I don't know that I belonged initially. I think that my friends, I don't know why, but sort of pulled me into this world, because I kept kicking and wanting to go back to the solo piano world where I was the star, where it was what I wanted to play. But I grew and I learned so much by them pushing me. And then I went away for a period of time. I actually went up to Toronto, lived up there for a couple years for a totally different reason, but played at solo bars up there. They didn't have a dueling bar up there. So I went back to the solo show, got really, really good as a solo performer, and maybe matured a bit. And then when I came back to Philly in 2012 and started at the dueling piano bar again, I was ready to rock. We got in the pocket. We were much more effective together as teams. A lot of the same people were there, some new people too. But I think it's that trust that we are there to make each other better. And it's communication. It's the nonverbal understanding when I'm worried what that looks like, even though I'm trying not to project that I'm worried on my face, because I don't want the crowd to see that I'm worried. Excuse me. But you've got to be able to catch that glance in my eye that's like that, oh crap, I don't know what we're doing next, guys, and react or respond to that effectively.
So Greg, as we kind of begin to move into what you do now, I do want to wrap up this part of it with this question, which is, what does it mean to you to be a performer or on that stage? What was that? What are those moments like for you?
It means everything. It's like oxygen. It is the best dopamine hit. And I've done a lot of drugs. I don't anymore, but it's the best dopamine hit I think life offers. I recently pulled up an article from when I was in college, and I had entered the very prestigious, I might add, Westchester University Karaoke Showdown. And at the time, they were giving first prize was, I think it was $300 or $500. Which, was a king's ransom in college in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
That bought a lot of Miller Lite.
Oh, you were
that's what the rich.
You were fancy.
That's what the rich kids drank, right?
Natty Light, brother.
Exactly. Actually, yeah, Natty Light is what it really bought. But so I thought, well, worst case, maybe some girl thinks I'm cute and I get a date out of it. And best case, I win a couple $100. And I wound up winning. And I was asked, what the experience was like. And I just sort of resurrected this article for something unrelated. But I said, I wish that every night, the way that crowd cheered after that first song, I wish I could experience that every night. And somehow I've managed to now craft a life where I kind of get that.
So I have the, I guess, background of knowing where your story goes. Mm-hmm. But obviously the folks listening right now do not. Mm-hmm. So I'll pointedly introduce the topic this way. What did it mean to have that taken away from you?
Yeah. It was a loss of who I was at a core that I didn't know existed. And as I'm revising one of my speeches, I'm realizing it's important to, I think, highlight the fact that at the depth of that loss, I became suicidal and was incredibly depressed. And so I don't know if that's answering the question or if it's just going down another rabbit hole, but everything that I just described performing being, it was the opposite, but magnified on a level that I really didn't ever see coming or couldn't have anticipated. I don't think, without having gone through it.
What happened? How did you get to that point?
Yeah. So, I mean, just, I brought up drugs, so I'll just carry on with it. I was not happy with where my life was headed. And I think it started a year or so into college because what I thought I wanted to do with my life, I quickly found out that I didn't. I thought I wanted to be a music teacher because mine in high school had a profound impact on how much I loved music. Before I went to military school, which is where I went to high school, I had sort of two real passions, ice hockey and music, the drums and whatnot. When I went to military school...
And real quick, is this moment in time before you won that very prestigious, as you said?
Yes.
Is this before you... Are you feeling this before you won that or after?
Yeah, before.
Okay.
So, got out of military school thinking I wanted to be a music teacher because of the impact that mine had on me. And then started to understand that what I thought teaching wasn't what teachers experienced teaching as. The bureaucracy, the sort of nonsense that went along with it that a good teacher doesn't let the students know about, doesn't show them. And I just thought, to hell with this. This is not how I want to spend my life. And one of my parents was a teacher, and I heard throughout my life, she did not seem very happy with the bureaucracy. It seemed it became less about students and more about nonsense. And so those two data points for me said, I don't want this anymore. And to be quite frank, I wasn't mature enough to undertake music as a career because it had always been kind of fun. And although we were paid, I was given scholarship to play in high school. The folks who were on scholarship at Westchester to be music education and music performance majors spent hours in the practice room and then hours studying theory and different very specific major classes. And I wanted to go explore being not a cadet at a military school. And those two things seemed diametrically opposed. And so as I tried to dig into these other worlds and majors and things that I didn't care about, booze started to look really good. And I used alcohol a lot, then pot, and that led to other things. And so we fast forward into my now professional career in a sales role that is paying very well, but is not how I want to spend my life. Other drugs became accessible, and it was sort of, how do I spend as little time in this world being the world of my professional job, and more time in any other world that just seems more fun to me. And I still had music as a part of my life. It was a very small part. It certainly didn't pay very well, and it wasn't something that I saw any sustainable lifestyle being built off of. It was, the best case would be move to Vegas, and I didn't want to do that. And then there was maybe take a job on a cruise ship, and I thought, I don't know that I like that idea. Like, do I want to? What I kept doing, quite frankly, was I kept projecting to 60. This, I think, is a big mistake. I kept making decisions based on would I want to do this when I was 60. So I thought, well, do I want to be a dueling piano player when I'm 60 and hope that somebody comes in with $100 bill for tip? you're going to be like, obviously the value of retrospect now, we can have fun with this, but what a stupid way for me to look at, to make decisions. But that's what I was doing. And I was very unhappy. And so masking that unhappiness was drugs. And what I would say kept me going was the opportunity to use my voice and kind of be a superstar and get that applause at the piano bar. But what people told me and I disregarded was that if I kept doing the things I was doing, because many of them were destructive to my voice, going out drinking several nights a week, smoking cigarettes, drinking while I performed, and I was hearing them, but I thought, oh, I'm good. And I would point to these very anomalous examples of singers and rock stars who still did these things. In 2015, I was performing more than I ever had in my life. I was doing large stage shows. We were selling out some theaters. I was doing the dueling piano gigs. Whenever I would travel, I would perform. So I'm performing in all sorts of different cities and different countries. And I also had my day job where I'm in sales and I'm talking all the time. Wake up in the morning, talk. I got to a point where my voice had become so damaged that it gave out on me. When it gives out on most of us, so if just for the average listener who doesn't know as much as I now do about the voice, when our voice gives out on us after a concert, it's generally because we've had something called a hemorrhage, right? So your voice, when your vocal cords smack together all day to produce sound, your voice experiences these micro tears. And that's totally normal. It's how you build muscle when you go to the gym, these micro tears in our bicep, for example. And overnight, generally, your voice heals itself. It heals pretty quick, just like your mouth heals pretty quick. But when you overdo it, say you're screaming at a concert and maybe you've had a couple Jack Daniels that day, so your vocal cords are extra dry, you can create a pretty big tear. That's called a hemorrhage. And then your vocal cords swell up, and that's where that raspy sound comes from. My voice had been perpetually raspy, and I worked with it and figured out how to sing around it, but it was getting worse and worse and worse. And from probably 2013 to 2015, I went from sort of like sexy raspy to like, oh my God, does he smoke 10 packs a day raspy? And it turns out what that was a combination of all of those hemorrhages that were happening to my vocal cords from overusing it, plus the fact that the booze and I would eat very garlicky, red sauce foods, acid indigestion was preventing my cords from healing at night. So I had this perfect storm of vocal damage that built upon vocal damage, almost as if you don't clear the ice off of your front walk, and then it snows and ices again, and then snows and ices again, and now you've got layers of ice that make it very treacherous. And singing on that put me in a position where doctors said, if you don't have surgery, give yourself 2 to 3 weeks, keep doing what you're doing, you're going to lose your voice forever. It's just going to stop working. And once it does, we can't repair that. There's no vocal cord transplant that you can have. So your options are surgical intervention or permanent loss of your voice. And we have to let you know, surgery is not guaranteed. And it's going to be anywhere from 6 to 8 months before you're able to resume speaking and singing like you do now. And in the moment, the first thing I thought of was, I'm going to lose my job. I went immediately to the money that I earned. And what was I going to do? I actually said to the doctor, I was like, I'm not Adele. Who's going to pay for those 6 to 8 months? Like Sony, Arista, nobody's stepping in to write a check for my life for the next, what do I do? And I wish he said something like a Star Trek or like, damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor, not a philosopher. But, he just said, look, these are your decisions. I can't make them for you. I can only tell you what might happen or what will happen. So I opted, so we had a long discussion about this, and I opted for, I said, could we do something a little more conservative? Because the one side of my vocal cords looked way worse. They were both god awful. If you see a healthy pair and you see what mine looked like, but one side looked way, way worse. So I said, could we do just the one side and then let it heal? Like, what would that do to the recovery time? Could that get me back to a point where I could work and maintain my lifestyle? See, I was so worried about this lifestyle that I had built up of things that I had and money that I made. And as I admitted earlier, things I actually didn't care at all about, but I had convinced myself were what was important. And so I'm sitting there negotiating, trying to save that. And he said, yeah, we can try that. And we did. And it went okay. I stopped smoking cold turkey. That was simple because he said, you can smoke or you can talk, but you'll never do both ever again. And that for me was enough to just go, that's it. But man, I still enjoyed drinking. And that was a challenge for me because even after one or two drinks, my vocal cords got dry and I became a little less conscious of how I was modulating the volume of my voice. So I would sort of take 2 steps forward and 2 steps back, or 3 steps back, and then 4 steps forward and 8 steps back. And it was this seesaw. And then we got to a point where it was fairly stable. And he said, now's the time to do another surgery to get the gunk off of the other side. And so over the next 5 years, from 2015 when the first surgery started till 2020, October 2020 was the last major one, I had 13 surgeries on my vocal cords and 2 major surgeries to rebuild a valve in my stomach to try and stem the acid reflux issues, because that was also a big concern that even if we do these surgeries and you heal, if you have stomach acid coming up on your vocal cords, you're done. Like, you're either going to have a Barrett's esophageal, which is basically throat cancer, or you're going to destroy your vocal cords because of the acid. So I was in this real damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. And about halfway through that, period of surgeries, I felt like, God, I haven't sang. I haven't sang a song in years. I forget what it's like to sing. I forget what it's like to be able to just stand up on a stage and be me. And I also was failing at my day job. I just couldn't do the things that the things that made me successful as a salesperson before involved a lot of socializing and a lot of being the dude that everybody liked hanging out with and could joke around, and that wasn't there. So I was failing in each aspect of my life and satisfied by none. And I was waiting for the subway one morning to go into to go into work, and I had some real thoughts about just stepping in front of one. Thankfully, part of what I did in school was study psychology. And thankfully, I wasn't in such a spot that I was too far gone to recognize that, hey, that's a problem that you need to address. It's okay not to be okay, but that's not okay. And so it was at that point that I decided to do something I just didn't know what.
Greg, did you ever perform high?
Yeah.
What kind of drugs? What kind of drugs came after pot? How deep did it go?
Yeah. So you dabble in cocaine a bit and MDMA. I mean, those are really my 2 happy drugs. Drugs of choice, drugs to sort of get away from that. But it was generally, pot that you'd smoke a joint. I would smoke a joint, and then I would go in and I'd perform. And you lose a step doing that sometimes, I lost a lot of steps sometimes doing that.
What was it like coming off of a performance where you perhaps had performed high, or you didn't feel like you had performed as you wanted to? You had mentioned how that was such a deep part of who you were, having all this stuff and being the center of attention and being the performer, all eyes on me. Did you have any moments there where you come off and be like, gosh, I don't even know what just happened?
Well, I think no, so I didn't have any of those. It was never it was never like that where,
Yeah.
someone sort of shook me and said, "Hey, you just missed the whole concert." It wasn't, it was, I guess I should be clear. I think of movies of like Jim Morrison or of like Amy Winehouse, and I did not use drugs like that.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that I used them like I assume I don't even know how to say
Where
this.
are you going with this?
You're like your average recreational user would use them. I'm not selling my mother's brooch to get to get a joint. But there were certainly times when I didn't perform at my best, but in many of the cases, I think that my team around me helped me perform good enough. That's why that trust is so important. And I think I abused that trust in some cases because they shouldn't have to do that. But the beauty of a good team is that whether it's because of a drug or whether it's because you just miss a chord or miss a song or miss a lyric, you're there to ensure that the whole performance is better for everybody.
So 15 surgeries later, the suicidal ideation thoughts, whether you obviously you didn't act on that, but the understanding that, hey, that's not okay. I also read that you had to spend 2 months in silence, right? At one point. What goes through somebody's head? What goes through your head at that time where all you have are your thoughts? What are you thinking about at that time?
I'm a pretty contemplative person, so I didn't dislike all of it. It's kind of nice, in some ways, just to be able to sit there and not have to participate, and you just have this like free out. Now I did have a whiteboard that was sort of like every vocal surgery person's accessory is a whiteboard. I'm holding up a whiteboard that looks like it might be on a dorm door at some point. But so you carry this around with a little dry erase marker. But what became frustrating with that was that I couldn't communicate quickly. And I'd like to think one of my gifts is I'm presence of mind. I'm generally pretty quick with retorts and words and things like that. And God, you try to write it all out. The conversation's moved on. We're on to the next topic before I can even get my thought out. Excuse me. So I felt very left out when I did want to participate. And it made going to business networking events next to impossible. Because who wants to talk to the weird dude with the whiteboard?
Why did you even continue to go to those things?
Because I am stubborn. I think that's also a trait, is that I am tenacious. And when you take that to the point of ridiculousness, I think it's called being stubborn. And I in a way looked at it like, all right, prove you're the best. Like, can you do it even with this? And for a little while I could. For like the first 3 months as this happened, I could. Because for me, it was new, it was novel. And I think that's, I was diagnosed with and grew up with ADHD and still struggle with it. And one of the things I've learned about people with ADHD is that it's not that we have a hard time concentrating full stop. We have a hard time concentrating on things that don't interest us. And for me, something novel in terms of a challenge, I'm lasered in on. So for the first 3 months, give or take, this was a really novel challenge. And I was really interested in figuring out how to overcome it. Once I figured that out, I was sort of bored with it and didn't want to invest my time. And I had lots of other things on my mind, like all the other surgeries and the vocal rehab and this and that. So I would bring it to networking events, but even at family events, it was hard to, be in on a joke when something's happening. And then I get frustrated if I would get frustrated with Kim, my wife, if she wouldn't help me. She almost had to be like my, seeing eye dog is the only, my sort of like guide, my companion. because I couldn't get someone's attention quick enough. And so I'd want her to like mention something, or if we were meeting new people, I'd want her to take the lead and go, this is Greg. He's not being a jerk. He just had vocal surgery, blah, blah, blah. And so if she didn't do that right away, I would kind of get frustrated and poke at her, and that made her frustrated. And then when we'd try to have a conversation, or, even, I think we got into more arguments when I couldn't talk than we do when I can talk, because it was harder to communicate.
So where did it go from there? Like you had this moment in the subway. You obviously are trying to repair your voice, and your voice sounds great right now. So we know obviously there was some recovery there. But where did you take it past that point?
Well, I mean, I think I did what any intelligent person does when they feel suicidal, and I went to a Tony Robbins event.
Non-medical advice. Non-medical advice.
What's that?
I said we are not in the business of giving medical advice, so that is non-medical advice here.
Yeah, that is non-medical. Not a doctor, not an attorney. No, I wish I could say, because I do know better, that I should have gone right to therapy. But the documentary I Am Not Your Guru was on Netflix, and I woke up one Saturday morning and I had really hated Tony Robbins. So backstory about this: my first boss in my corporate life gave me a tape by Zig Ziglar, and I literally wore this tape out on my 2-hour drive each way to the office, listening to it over and over and over again. It's called How to Be a Winner. And I remember listening to some of the things that he said about what I now know as the concept of reframing. So don't think of it as an alarm clock. Think about it as an opportunity clock. When that opportunity clock goes off in the morning, that's your opportunity to shine. And I thought, what idiot believes this? Come on, it's an alarm clock. Not a stoplight, it's a go light. Come on, Zig, get over yourself. And it that bled into a friend a couple years later who gave me a Tony Robbins book saying like, hey, I like this guy. I think you would too. And that sort of jaded, view of these things went into the book. And the first, I think it's Awaken the Giant Within, like the first chapter or somewhere in there, he says, as I was flying in my helicopter over the school where I used to be a janitor, I thought, man, isn't life fascinating? I literally threw the book into the wheel well of the car I was in. I was like, this is bull. So, when the documentary came out, I thought, you know what? I'm up early. I can't, nothing else I can do. Let me just watch this thing. Because I thought I'd like to see if it's as BS as I think it is. What I was fascinated by was I recognized actual psychological principles, actual therapeutic interventions taking place on the floor in this documentary. And I started to think, all right, maybe this isn't all smoke and mirrors and snake oil. Maybe there really is something to what this dude's doing. And I was at a point in life where I kind of had nothing else to lose. So I Googled his session, Unleash the Power Within. It's sort of like his hallmark event where, the stepping stone into his world. And there happened to be one coming up in, I think it was a couple months or whatever, in New Jersey. And so I bought a ticket. And I thought like the worst thing that happens is I go and I hate it. And it fascinates me to this day what happened next, because I bought like the cheapest hotel room at the cheapest like motel that was nearby, because I thought I'm probably only going to need this for one night and I don't want to lose, my whole deposit. So $50 a night, whatever, sounds good. And I, show up the first day to pick up my ticket. And I'm embarrassed to say this. One of the people walking by, like one of the Tony Robbins employees, there was a huge line, first of all, to wait in. It was going around the building. And I was too important to wait in line, don't you know? So I thought I'm going to look for a place to sort of, duck in. And one of these Tony Robbins people dropped a whole bunch of papers. And so I bent over to pick it up, to help them pick it up. And in sort of all the commotion that was going on, I snuck under the rope and went right in, skirted this whole line of people going around the building. So if you're listening and you were one of those people that I butted in line in front of, I apologize. And, if you've ever been to one of these events, you'll walk in and there's people high-fiving and there's music. And I was very much like, oh, don't touch me. Like, get away from me. Like, I'm just here. I'm like, please, I don't want to high-five you type of guy. by the final day, I'm hugging strangers. I'm high-fiving people. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. I'm drinking. I don't even want to call it Kool-Aid, but I'm all in. I'm fully committed to this experience. And it was at that event that I met a woman who changed my life forever. And I don't know that she understands the gravity of what she did with this conversation. And we've stayed in touch. And I lost touch with her for a couple months, but she actually just popped up like 2 or 3 days ago. Her name is Svetlana, and she is an immigrant. And she came here some years ago and then suffered a pretty nasty car accident, which hospitalized her and almost took her life. And so she spent a lot of time in hospital. And I think that's where she developed her interest in Tony Robbins. But so she was there. We met in the concession stand line, just standing behind each other. And she, I forget how we got to talking, but she started to share her story with me. And I was just blown away. I mean, what she endured just to get out of the country she lived in to get to where she, lived now here in the Philadelphia area was mind-boggling. And then what she endured when she got here with her medical issues and the trauma from that accident was incredible. And then to hear that she had built this real estate empire for herself was unbelievable. So I'm like, jaw on the floor listening to her. And then she says, so what about you? What's your story? And I'm thinking to myself, lady, nobody cares what my story is. That's a story. That's amazing. And she goes, no, come on, I want to know. So we sit down at a table and I just start telling her everything. And that's what I love about strangers. And I think they're so important in our life because we really can achieve so much by just being completely open. And strangers are often the safest people to be completely open with because I don't know you, you don't know me. I probably don't care about you. You probably don't care about me. So here it all is. What are you going to do with it? And I think that the universe surprises us when we're willing to be vulnerable like that, when we're willing to just be authentically us. And I chose that moment unintentionally because I didn't know what else to do. And after I shared what was going on in my life and where I was in life, she said, that's really interesting. I think you're going to find a lot here. There's more here, than you know. And then she moved over, and it's open seating at these events. She moved over and sat with where I was sitting that day. And so at the next break, I wanted to get an energy drink. I wanted to get a sugar-free Monster because I was doing the keto diet at that point in time. Not that any of that's relevant. This is how my mom tells stories, by the way. 19 pieces of information that don't matter to the story and then the point. So it doesn't matter what I was drinking. We go on a quest for this drink. And we're walking along the floor because you can get to the floor in between the breaks, and we're looking up at everything. And there's the cheap seats where we're sitting. And now we're here where all the, Shaun White and all these other famous people are up in the front. And she goes, I've been thinking about what you were saying about how you like to perform and you're interested in psychology and philosophy, and repeating what I had shared with her, all these other things that I saw as, well, this is the music part of me. And this is the intellectual part of me, and this is the money part of me, and this is the travel and fun and, stuff that I didn't share with other people, being open about, my shortcomings in life or things that have set me back anyway. And she said, I think that if you put all them together, and she pointed up at the stage, she goes, I think that's you. I think what you have to say could help a lot of people. And it was one of those moments where I just thought, God, I can't believe I never thought of that before, but maybe there's something to this. And that night I went back to my hotel room and I started just journaling furiously about what would it look like? How would I do that? What would I even want to do? What would be the impact that I want to have? And as soon as the event was over, I went home and I started going through my LinkedIn and figuring out who I knew that was even close to that world that I could interview and say, what did you like? What did you not like? What do you wish you knew when you started? What kind of money do you make? And after 50-ish people, I realized that it was a viable choice. And that's what I decided to do. I decided to become a motivational / inspirational speaker. And now I deliver keynotes. I MC events all over the world.
How long was it till you got your voice back? Till you felt, I'll use air quotes here, normal?
What's today? March 4th, 2022.
Yeah.
I don't know that I feel normal. Because I'm always... all right, so let me back up. A couple months ago, my vocal team said it would be to your advantage to start thinking of yourself as post-recovery. Meaning your voice is not going to recover anymore, but you can develop it like you would as a, pre-surgery healthy voice, but you can develop it to be better. So that is to say the pathology is largely gone. There are still some lingering things like a little bit of scarring on one cord from the surgery. But I'll never be better to the extent that I'd wager 99.9% of the people that listen to this have never thought, oh, I might lose my voice forever. I think people don't even realize that's a possibility. And so I have a decibel meter on my phone, and I'm hyper conscious when we go to a restaurant. How loud is it? If it's more than 90-ish decibels, either we're going to eat in silence or we should go find somewhere else, because that's really unsafe for my voice. We don't go to clubs. I don't drink anymore. I don't do drugs. Even working out had to change the way that the way that you tense your muscles, the way you hold your breath and whatnot. That really contracts the vocal folds. So I don't know that my voice, I think the question was, how long did it take till I felt normal? If that's not the question, tell me. But I don't know that I feel normal. In a way, I actually just feel better. I don't know that I want to go back to normal. I actually think I prefer this.
So what is the message that you promote then through all of this? Is it that, hey, disruption doesn't have to mean you have to find a way back to normal? No, but it does involve disruption. That was my assumption, so that's on me.
Yeah, no, that's cool. One would think, and actually when I first started, I hired a coach because I think coaching is important and I wanted to get there quickly. And so I said to the coach, I want to talk about fulfillment and gratitude and happiness. And she said, do you want to get paid for this? I said, yes. And she said, good luck. Because there are a million people out there who want to talk about those things. Why don't we find something that's a little more marketable, but that also has elements of what you want to talk about? And so what we landed on was disruption, because of everything that had happened with my voice. And maybe more importantly, everything that didn't happen in my life that led up to losing my voice. Because prior to that, and if you think about what I said when I heard the news that I needed surgery, I was trying desperately to minimize change and disruption in my life. I'd say I spent a good chunk of it just trying to not maintain the status quo, but prevent loss. And that's a real recipe for disaster. What I learned through this whole experience is that change, disruption, is not only necessary, but it's a good thing. Because it's a change that sustains, it's going to last for us, and it'll set a new standard. And I kept trying to sustain what was happening and not let new standards happen. So I started out talking about disruption, but then the pandemic happened. I mean, God, now everybody in some way is maybe not a academic expert on disruption, but they're certainly an empirical expert on disruption.
Right.
And I felt like we were all disrupted out, and everybody and their mom in the keynote speaking world became a disruption speaker. So I started listening to clients and listening to friends who have businesses and what their challenges were. And now I actually spend more time talking about performance and how we develop leaders who can perform and be highly fulfilled with the work that they're doing, which in many ways is the challenge that I had starting out. And maybe if I'd listened to if I was in a spot where what my manager was trying to tell me was what I was hearing, maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation. Maybe I'd never be here. Maybe I'd be the best salesperson that company had ever seen. But what he was trying to say and what I was hearing were two different things. He was trying to say, this is a different way to look at living your life that will really help you. And what I was hearing was, this is somebody on this tape, Zig Ziglar, who doesn't look at life objectively, who cherry picks. And now I understand that that's the magic of what he does, is that there is no objectivity in life. There's what you make it. There's how you process it. There's what you see and there's what I see. And we can be looking at the same thing and see two different things. We process two different things. And that's what's amazing, is that when you change the way you process the information that you're given, you change what happens next. That's what I'm working on right now, has to do with the belief that what scares us isn't that we're powerless, but it's actually that we are so much more powerful than we're comfortable with. And so we try to find ways, little ways, subtle ways, we may not even realize we're doing it, to seed that power. There's a philosopher named Erich Fromm who has an amazing book, Escape from Freedom. And the two concepts he talks about in there are freedom from and freedom to. Most people think they want freedom to, but what it turns out most of us actually want is freedom from. And that's, I think, so present in my life's experience that I kept saying, I want this and I want that. But every move I made was to the opposite of what I was saying I wanted. And there's a concept in psychology called approach avoidance. I don't mean to go down the rabbit hole, but this is the stuff that now really gets my juices going. And it's post-traumatic growth, I think, is really what I have the benefit of experiencing. Most people don't get this until they're diagnosed with a terminal illness. But because of who I was and what I valued in life, my voice and singing, that conversation with the doctor when he said, you're going to lose your voice if you don't get these surgeries done, that was my terminal illness. So I get to experience that magic of that first karaoke show, kind of every time I go out on stage.
You mentioned, we've all kind of become disruption experts over the last several years. And I think there has been a lot of lamenting of what we have lost. And certainly what freedoms have been perhaps infringed upon, whether for good reasons or not. You mentioned earlier, Greg, as we kind of begin to wrap things up here in our last few minutes, you mentioned that getting that news, that you may lose your voice, that you would have to go through all this, felt like a loss of who you were at your core. How do you view that disruption now? And to take it one step further, and I will ask a multi-part question here very intentionally, how do you view that disruption now? And how do you think we should view the disruption that we've gone through over the last couple of years?
It's a choice. We can either become powerless or powerful. And if we see this disruption that happened to us as something that happened to us, an act of aggression, a loss, then we're powerless. Then we're victims. If we see it as something that happened, now what do we do? Well, now we become powerful because we've got a choice. We can say, this happened. The circumstances in which I find myself, in which I exist, are now different. What am I going to do about it? Fighting to go back is an option, but just like trying to run your character backwards in the first Super Mario Brothers game, it ain't going to happen. There is no back to normal. This game that we're living in only goes forward. So we can either bang our heads against the wall and hope that this changes, or we can take a little personal responsibility. We can use a little creativity, and we can say, what do we do? That, I think, is the difference. And that mindset shift didn't happen overnight. For me, it didn't happen just with, I mean, I've read hundreds of books since that Tony Robbins event. And prior to it, I only read books that were assigned to me in college, or like maybe the occasional like fun fiction book. I'm consistently changing what I'm consuming, and that impacts how I think. And a lot of people don't do that intentionally. They consume whatever's thrown at them on Netflix. And I'm not anti-TV. I love movies. My wife would tell you I love popcorn more than I love movies, but I love movies. But I think life, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, I think life gave me what I was refusing to do for myself. And I think it's a very lucky few who get that. I think it's even fewer who recognize what they've been given. Because I see a lot of people, and I don't mean this to seem like I'm above them or anything, but I see a lot of people walking through Philadelphia who are just friggin' miserable. And maybe they have good reason to. It hurts when you hurt. I broke my foot. It's not a big deal thing, but I was in a crappy mood more often than not when I had that broken foot trying to get around with crutches. Like, I get it. But I also think that there's a modicum of personal responsibility that a lot of people are missing these days. It's everybody's fault. It's this government's fault. It's that government's fault. It's this person's fault. It's that person said a bad thing that I don't like. Change the channel. Move on. If I sat there and dwelled on, all of the crap that got handed to me in this situation, I would bring that perspective into life. And I'd always see things as that's not my fault. That's how the world is. Poor me. Like, wouldn't I be better? But luckily I'm surrounded by people and have sought out people that help me shift the way I view things. And those terrible events in my life actually became fuel for professionally the best thing I've ever experienced. So would I want to do it again? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Do I wish it never happened? That's a hard question to answer.
To the person who lost somebody during this time, to the person who perhaps has a terminal illness, who says, look, you almost lost your voice, you had surgery, you're fine, you're talking on a podcast now. What do you say to them?
What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it?
Is that fair to ask?
Yes. And let me clarify what I mean by that.
Ahead.
If you lost a loved one and you're not happy, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to get involved? Are you going to run for an office? Are you going to step up and take responsibility to change things? Or are you going to stand and complain? Because it's really easy to complain, but getting involved in changing the system is really, really hard. But if you're really, really upset, channel that frustration. To the person that's listening with a terminal illness, first of all, I can't even begin to reconcile with how that must feel. It is not even a comparison of night and day. I went through something bad, but I'm still here. But you now have a choice of what to do with your time. I don't have that choice, and I don't know what that looks like. I might say, you know what my choice is? To stay home and be with my family. I don't give a damn about the world because I won't be here in a little bit. I have no idea and no business telling you what choice to make. But if you told me that in 5 days, I would never have a voice again, I'd record a message for my daughter. I would be very, very judicious about what I did. And I think that that's the benefit that I was given. It's the benefit that those people have, is that understanding that this time we have is so precious. And many of us, myself included, for so much of it, waste it. We waste the power that we have. You look at much of the wrong that I see going on in the world today stems from our own abdication, each of us as individuals, of our own responsibility and authority. That a lot of us sit back and we go, well, this party, that party, doesn't really matter. Nothing's going to change. And nothing does, because we've willed that into action by not getting involved, by not stepping up. Step up. That's what I'd ask that person, to do, is to do something that means something to them or that can make it better for next time. Because that's what we got. We can't go back and fix the past, but we can do something different now to change the future.
I like where that went, Greg. I appreciate you getting there. What is a question that you wish you were asked more?
Man, we're going to have to cut out a long pause here.
You have no idea how many times I have to do that.
What do I wish I was asked more? Why do I think we're here? I wish people were more curious about why we're here. And maybe they are, and they just stop talking about it after a certain age.
Well, what's your answer? Why do you think
I think that we're here to make a difference. I think that back to sort of that last question, and I mean, it's a real core belief that's bubbled up for me in the last couple years. And I think about a comedian, I think it's Bill Burr, who, he's a comedian, so he makes jokes for a living. So this is a joke that he says. But he talks about people who have babies who aren't going to grow up to do anything meaningful for the world. And he says, they're just taking up a parking space at Walmart. Damn it, if you weren't around, I could have a closer spot to the door. And it's a joke that another comedian's making. But there are a lot of people on this planet. What do you think this world would look like if all of us were focusing our time and energy on doing something that made it better for the next person? I like to call it, I don't like to call it, it's called altruistic utilitarianism. It's doing things that make this better for everybody. I think that's why we're here. I think we're here to see how good of a team we could be if we all work together. And if I could get everybody thinking about that, I don't know what it would change, but I know it'd be a hell of a conversation.
Well, hey, at least the people that are listening here are going to be thinking about it, so you've left them with that. Greg, how can people get in contact with you? How can people connect with your work and follow along with what you're doing, man?
Yeah, so I'm on all the socials, Gregory Offner Jr. LinkedIn's probably the platform I spend the most time on social-wise, and then I have a website, which is gregoryoffner.com, and people can check out my work there. They can email me there. Happy to connect with anybody. I just had an outreach from some random person on LinkedIn who said they'd been through something similar, almost lost their voice, and we're going to have a virtual coffee date in a couple of days. So, I love to converse with people.
Fantastic. Awesome stuff, man. Thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate where we've got to eventually, and good stuff, man. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, Michael, it's a pleasure.
Many thanks to Greg Offner for sharing his story on the show this week. Please do me and Greg a huge favor. Share this episode with someone you know who might find some value in listening to Greg's story and our conversation about it here today on the show. Share this episode with your network. Help me spread the good word about the importance of asking more questions. And if you like the conversations with the amazing guests like Greg that I have on each and every episode, please consider subscribing so that you never miss when a new episode drops. If you ever want to get in touch with me, you can always email me at michael@thefollowupquestion.com, or you can go to michaelashford.com and reach out there. I'll catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question. And until then, keep asking questions.